Let me now resume the categorization of models. We have been introducing the category of representation models, the category of prescription models. We didn't touch explanation models. We had some thoughts about guidance models and steering models. We should continue with informative models and maybe perception models, and that's it. Conceptual models, usage models, amalgam, domain situation models, investigative models, and thought models maybe can be delayed for a later consideration. As already said, representation models have already been captured in the first part of this lecture. Prescription models as well. Guidance and orientation models, especially those that are governing, let's say, religious ceremonies and maybe some kind of orientation for humans, have been covered already. We touched already steering models, stopped at this place. Steering models have a governing and guidance role for the social and interaction aspect, but the main role is their methodological role. That means steering models are in reality macro or meta models because of they guide and rule and govern some kind of activities. For this reason, we have, of course, application and use, management for application and practice, as well as acceptance and communicability as one of the main, let's say, assets we have to use for these models. Okay, let's now continue with the next class we didn't cover so far. This is the class of informative and description models. Informative models have been already covered in lectures before in this course. They are, of course, somehow oriented on the representation aspect, but they are also somehow concerned with the social and interaction aspect. Acceptance and communicability is as well as important as the ability to use and to make your own. For this reason, we have typically with informative models information as a main concern. Information, at least in the anthropomorphic setting, or let's say in the business informatics setting. That means in this case, information are data that are transferred, received by human, transferred to, received by humans, somehow digested and somehow made your own. That means in this case we have information as data that are somehow useful for a human. We can also relate information, the information notion, to some kind of usefulness within a number of processes. One specific informative model is a description model. That is describing the origins in such a way that we understand what is the essence of the origin, what is the specific aspect we should consider, and for this reason, of course, we combine representation aspects with some, but very few, social and interaction aspects. Another class of models of this kind are usage models. Usage models are oriented on processes. They somehow have to describe. They can, in this case, maybe in a prototypical way or an exemplary way, only describe specific usage scenes as origins of the usage model. For this reason, the usage model has mainly some kind of worksheet role for utilizing, for deploying something, maybe especially the origins. For this reason, we have, of course, a bit of perception and utilization within the representation aspect, and a bit of concordance and judgment in the social and interaction aspect. The main part, however, is that we are able to use and to apply the origin or whatever is described. That means we are able to manage our life cases for applications and for practices, and to practice as well. That is now the usage model. Now we can directly derive some frames for model specification. Frames are useful whenever we want to have some kind of pretty simple way of specifying. For this reason, we are targeting on a canonic description of models. Canonic doesn't mean that we have to follow this guideline completely. Canonic means that it will ease our work in such a way that we have only to specify additionally the specific parts, and the essential and most, let's say, common parts are already given for this kind of models. And of course, in this case, we will have a characterization of the model being. One specification frame could be given an artifact, whatever it is, or a thought, or maybe some object. Then we can say, okay, fine, according to our analysis, we might conclude that the kind of model we consider is some, maybe one or more of the categories we have been handling so far. Then we describe the artifact, we describe the scenario in which this model should have a function, and for this reason we can also somehow describe the cargo. Additionally, we can describe the origin. Additionally, we can somehow relate to the background, especially the grounding and the basis, and maybe in a specific manner also we can describe the concepts that are of importance. And then we can at least some part of the community describe. What is the community of the given origin and artifact? And what is the community for this model? Then we can describe the model properties, adequacy and dependability, with the classical frame we have been using all the time. And we can add specific properties for the artifact and the object for the model being. We can also describe analogies and maybe give some additional comments. This would be a pretty nice and simple interface to describe the model being of an object, an artifact, a thought. Then in this case we are able to stereotype the model being, and we can use our consideration of stereotypes, pattern and templates, we did already this part in chapter 6, for stereotyping of the model being. The model being is a secondary property. The main properties of some object, artifact, thought are of course characterized before we can reason about the model being. The model being is then in this case an additional characterization of those artifacts, objects or thoughts. Then in this case we can try to start with some kind of canon. The canon will consist of the model category, of some kind of informative representation model of the models. That means in this case we have already a B modeling approach, since we have an informative representation model of that model. Then we can describe the utilization scenario, the methods provided with the model, and of course also some kind of cargo and canon together. The canon for the model is how the model is used, what is the main background behind this instrument, and why we use a model. We will later see that this will directly lead to the SMART and SWOT evaluation of models. How simple, meaningful, adequate, realistic and trackable is a model? Or what are the strengths, weaknesses and opportunities and threats of a model? The third component of such kind of description by an informative representation model is adequateness and dependability. That means in this case we might use some kind of canonical representation so that we have a pretty simple way to inherit whatever has already been developed. This leads directly to the so-called pure evaluation procedure, positively stated, understandable, rewarding, and evaluative. Additionally, we might also use a reasoning frame to be used for our modeling canon, various kinds of deduction, induction, abduction, non-monotonic reasoning, calculus, model-backed reasoning, abstraction, causal reasoning, epistemic reasoning, etc. That means in this case we come back anyway to the reasoning. In this case we have now a canon how to specify the model and the model being. We say, okay, fine, in this case we use a model category, second the usage canon, third the adequateness and dependability, and fourth the reasoning frame for our models. That means in this case we have now with the informative or informative representation model a number of utilization scenarios. We have some methods that are somehow provided, of course, with a model that is a part of the deep model, and the cargo of a model. As already explained, the cargo of the model in our extended understanding is somehow a specification of the mission in utilization scenarios or even spectra, the determination of the model, an abstract declaration of the meaning, and maybe also some kind of explanation of the identity, maybe in a narrative form. And the canon in this case consists of the usage canon, the adequateness and dependability canon, and the reasoning frames we are using for the model. That means again we can ease our task somehow to specify what is in a model. That means in this case we can now provide some kind of systematical treatment of the model being. In this case I would like to propose a procedure for deciding whether an artifact, some sorts, or an object is a model, based of course on our model canon that eases our specification of the model being, but anyway we need to do some home tasks. The home tasks are we evaluate the model being property or the model property by the model utility, by the function a model plays, by the adequacy and dependability. And in this case, of course, we should not have all possible explanations for that. We should only restrict ourselves to the most essential ones. That means for the model utility, for the members, we say, okay, fine, in this case, the model is used within some kind of model utilization scenarios. A member can have a profile, a personal profile especially, a portfolio, a utility characteristic, a quality of use, and in general a member is somehow specified, as we did in web information systems development, as a personae. Then we can specify which functions we have in mind. From the functions we can derive the purpose and the goal in the given scenario. This could be given in a narrative form, within the context, with a specific background, according to the model stereotype. Of course, we are only interested which functions are really satisfactorily supported by our model. In a similar form, we can do it for the adequacy. You can say, okay, fine, the adequacy, according to the adequateness canon, we can specify in the following form. The same we can do with dependability. That means in this case we have now some kind of evaluation. And of course, if somebody is evaluating, we should also keep at least or record some judgment details. Who, when did this kind of evaluation? What is maybe the basis of that judgment? Which reasons are given? For which community? Then in this case we have now developed already some stereotype for demarcation. If you look a little bit back to the chapters 3.2 and 8, then we have already considered this problem of demarcation. What is a model? What is not a model? What is a function of the model in a given scenario? Can we delineate scenarios? The role of the model, etc. That means in this case we have now a characterization of the model being. Okay, this concludes now part 2 of the module. The next part will be activities of modeling and their support. In this case we will have 6 lectures: activities to models, methods for model deployment or development, modeling as programming, that is a new wave towards next generation programming based on models. Then we have to look into model quality and model assessment, and of course modeling is an engineering activity, and for this reason we should keep it as an engineering activity. This will be part 3 of this module. In the next course I will give at least some glimpses and pieces on activities to models. Since models have to be developed and to be used, we should also have some kind of support for that. How we can do it in a proper form. What it means is that a model is developed. And in most cases a model developed will be anyway a model suite with a number of models combined somehow, associated in a pretty nice and handleable association form. And models must not be a model forever. They have a journey of lifespan, and they could be at a certain moment only objects. At another moment they become again models, and after a while they are again only objects. In a different scenario they might again become objects. And then we can maybe use a model for, let's say, learning and teaching. Typically modeling is also teamwork. And teamwork means we have a series of compromises and of course negotiations. We use some specific case as we did or the time, and we will show what is the essence of these activities to model. In German language we have it easier. We say Modell, modellieren, Modellierung, and have in mind that model is the model, to model is modellieren, and Modellierung is modeling. English language does not distinguish the last two parts. For this reason we use the word to model for the activities and modeling for the high level reasoning about what we do with models, about the modeling process, about the model utilization. Okay, thank you for the lecture, for attention. I hope to see you in the next lecture. Now we concluded part 2. Now we can have a rest and enjoy life. No, where's my stop button?